Hello folks and welcome to this podcast. This is a Beethoven special. I bet you any money that you think you know everything about Beethoven. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, think again. Beethoven is very much a man of mystery and intrigue, a really complex character. And that's why I think we musicians, composers, etc. love Beethoven. If I were to kind of juxtapose Mozart with Beethoven and say, well, relate them to a chocolate bar, I would probably say Mozart was Cadbury's Dairy Milk because it's very smooth. And I would relate Beethoven to a UK brand known as Caramac because it was difficult to get through. You could only take so much and then you'd need to stop and then maybe chomp it the next day or something, bit at a time, because Beethoven's music is totally unlike anybody else I've heard. Put it this way, Beethoven's music to me is like a mystery tour bus. Now you know where you're starting from, so you get on the bus and you sit your bum down on the seat, and everybody comes in and the bus is full, and off it trundles, and you go from town to town, out into the countryside, hither and thither, and eventually you arrive at your destination. Beethoven's music to me is very much like that. It's a mystery tour. You know where he's starting, but you never know where he's going with his music. Whereas Mozart, and I do dearly love Mozart. I mean, him and Beethoven and Bach are my three favourites. In fact, Debussy, I should say 4 favourites. But with Beethoven, his stuff is so unusual, he really thinks out the box. Mozart is very 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. Mozart's very, what could you say, you can understand where he's going. It's easy to see where he's taking the music, but with Beethoven, you know, his would be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4. You know, it's just all over the place, and yet it's organised. That's the crazy thing. What a fantastic brain. One of his admirers once described him as a beautiful mind. So let's have a look at some of the little secrets I may uncover. But before I do, I would ask you to watch out for this Beethoven special show that I'm doing on YouTube. It'll be on the Tartan Composer channel, the one with the black and white circular logo, and you'll see about 5 or 6 shows already on that channel. Watch out for the Beethoven special because it promises to be really exciting and entertaining. Now, let's look at some of the things that you thought you knew about Beethoven. Number 1. Beethoven, when he was 12, composed a little piece of music for a dead poodle. I can't believe it. He wrote for a dead dog. Now, nobody knows who the dog was or whatever. I can't find any info on that. But they do say that he did write that little piece of music. So here's a wee indication of the tenderness of Beethoven, considering that his upbringing was anything but tender. I mean, his father was a total brute, an alcoholic drunkard who had no feelings for anybody but himself, and he would beat the poor lad senseless if he played wrong notes on the piano or didn't do what his dad wanted him to do. And sometimes he would even lock the young Ludwig in the cellar where it would be dark and damp, and it would be quite frightening for the young lad. And so, as you can imagine, being given regular beatings by your father, music's not something that you would think the guy really loved. But it was in Ludwig to become a great man, a genius composer. And that's where he and his dad differed. Because unlike Ludwig's grandfather, who was a respected musician and a Kapellmeister, that means like a musical director of all the choirs and the church organist and any other musicians. He was in charge of them all, doing the arrangements, writing the music, stuff like that. Very important job. But he was well known in the town and he was well loved, unlike the dad, who was a total ass, shall we say. So here we have this difference. Ludwig always looked to his granddad and remembered him fondly. And yet the dad gave him nothing but beatings, and he was a very strict disciplinarian with music. And you can't do that with kids. If you want to teach a kid, then teach them properly. There is an old saying that honey works better than vinegar. And I think that's absolutely true. I remember many moons ago, I was, I'm going back about 40 odd years ago, maybe even 50. I remember I was a voluntary percussion tutor because I played drums at the time. And I was helping these young lads with a local concert brass band. And the trumpet, the teacher, was a champion trumpet player. He had all these cups and awards and all sorts of stuff. And but he was an absolute bloody tyrant. I mean, he ruled over those kids with an iron fist, and he used to frighten the life out of them week by week, shouting and bawling at them for the least little thing. And I used to think to myself, God, I wonder why those kids turn up every week, or why they don't say to his parents, come home in tears, shattered, But some people are good teachers and some people just shouldn't be in those jobs because they haven't got the patience for it. Anyway, let's look at Beethoven's next secret. Beethoven, I think, from reading various different sources and books, he was quite a kind of paranoid guy. I think he always felt people were out to rip him off. If you ever read some of the very early accounts of people who knew him, he made sure that he got paid what he wanted to be paid. Now, I think he had a friend, I'm not sure if Schindler was the publicist or a PA type guy that handled all these different things. But some of the commentators reckon that Schindler was actually doing him out of money and he didn't know in terms of publishing rights and things. But he did watch his money. He looked after his brass, if you like. And he was very cantankerous. But you have to remember, this is a man who grew up with a horrible background, only received love from his mum and just beatings from his father, who never encouraged him in any way. In fact, he wasn't a child prodigy. Now you compare Beethoven's life with Mozart's. Mozart's father, Leopold, was a trained violinist and a well-respected musician. He even brought out a tuition book for violin, I dare say, and maybe like a primer in music. Now, he taught his son and his daughter how to read music, how to play piano, how to play violin and various instruments. And his son was a natural. So was the daughter, actually, Nan Errol. She was actually supposed to be fantastic on piano. But as is our wont in those days, the men, they always go for the males. It was very patristic in those days, kind of paternal, fatherly, if you like. And women weren't offered much scope even if they were more talented than the male. But however, Mozart was a child prodigy and he was composing music, as young as 4. And that's quite amazing, whereas Beethoven wasn't like that. And if you read about Beethoven, you'll find that he did loads and loads and loads of revisions of his work. If it didn't work, he would revise it until he felt it was absolutely perfect. And this was borne out in a lot of his live performances, where certain audiences just didn't take to the stuff that he wrote. And basically, we have this saying, he or she was ahead of their time. And that's what I believe about Beethoven at times. He was writing stuff that was ahead of its time for the kind of tame audiences that he was playing to in these palaces and great halls and stuff for the aristocrats and the nobility. They were used to nice, sweet, safe little music, and along comes this wild-looking guy, sits down at the piano and plonks away on the keys and basically raises their hackles, and frightens them to death and unnerves them and excites them at the same time. They didn't know whether they were coming or going when Beethoven started something. And so a lot of his work at the beginning wasn't a particular success, whereas with Mozart, although he was just seen as a court musician at first, he never had any problems with his compositions. They were always fairly well received, although he did have one occasion where, probably due to jealousy, however, being an older man now, I have to say it's probably not just jealousy, because the young tend to be very show-off, and it's like, look what I can play, look what I can do, and they want to go at 100 miles an hour, whether it's on a piano or shredding on a guitar or playing a recorder or a flute or a sax or a trumpet or whatever it is. They always want to go fast. It's an age thing, I think. It's definitely an age thing. And it's immaturity, and therefore when I see people sitting down to play, or indeed Rachmaninoff himself, and they play all this technical shredding on the piano, it just turns me cold, because I'm very much a harmony guy, right? I believe in melody and harmony, counterpoint, that's fine. But for me, melody and harmony are king. I'm really not into this running up and down scales and in and out of modes and stuff at 100 mile an hour, because what does it say? I would rather hear 6 notes that said something than 100 notes played in rapid succession on a keyboard or any other instrument. So for me, melody's king. But let's get back to Beethoven. He didn't have a success with everything that he did. The thing is, as I say, I think he was ahead of his time. But Beethoven was a resolute man. He wasn't one to be put off by such things, and he stuck to his guns. He was determined, and probably that's where his stubborn streak came in. His stubborn streak probably helped him do this, because if you read about Beethoven, he was nobody's puppet. I think at one stage his old alcoholic dad thought he would drag him round the concert halls and the salons of the rich and the famous, and maybe rake some cash in from his son performing. And strangely enough, Ludwig just wouldn't perform. And so that humiliated the dad and made him worse. And that meant that when he did get home, he was on to a sound thrashing once again from that horrible old dad of his. But all these things made Ludwig the man he was in later life. And so he stuck to his guns and basically revised and revised. Okay, I'll come back with part 2 of The Secret Life of Beethoven. Please listen out. Tell me what you think of it. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks much. Bye.